They came without warning. No declaration of war, no diplomatic overtures, only massive ships drifting silently into Earth's orbit, casting long shadows over oceans and cities alike. Their message wasn't shouted. It was delivered coldly across every screen, frequency, and transmission point: surrender. They called themselves the Sovereignty, a union of ancient, dominant civilizations. Their voice was calm, but laced with contempt. They had seen our world from afar, studied our history, mocked our wars, and labeled our weapons as crude toys built by a desperate species clinging to survival. To them, our missiles were relics, our fighters outdated, and our nukes nothing more than fireworks. They considered Earth a minor inconvenience, unrefined, outmatched, and easy to break. And yet Earth said nothing. For 3 days their fleet hovered. Their arrogance hung heavier than their ships. They believed the silence was fear. They mistook it for hesitation. But Earth's silence was not the silence of surrender. It was calculation. In bunkers deep beneath mountains and oceans, in command centers lit by old fluorescent tubes and fading displays, the world was not preparing to plead. It was preparing to strike. Not with sophistication, not with superiority, but with something far more dangerous: conviction. The Sovereignty didn't understand that Earth's strength never came from its technology. It came from its will. From a history written in rebellion. From every war fought without guarantees. From every time survival meant doing the impossible. And so, when the first counterattack launched, it wasn't elegant. It wasn't clean. But it was effective. Dozens of intercontinental missiles streaked into the sky. Not guided by next-gen AI, but by ancient code and hardened steel. They didn't aim for the ships. They aimed beneath them. They shattered the sky. Shockwaves hammered the hovering armada. EMPs scrambled their systems. Radiation seared against energy shields calibrated for cosmic dust, not raw human spite. And in the chaos, as their formations broke, more weapons followed, not from spaceports, but from submarines, hangars, deserts, forests. Outdated fighter jets took flight. Pilots with calloused hands and steel nerves charged headfirst into giants. The Sovereignty's defenses, tuned for order, couldn't adapt to the chaos. Their algorithms faltered. Their clean warfare unraveled. They had never fought enemies like this: erratic, stubborn, relentless. They called Earth primitive. But Earth had just begun to answer. They hadn't expected a response. Not a real one. Not something that could hurt. The Sovereignty's fleet, gleaming monuments to their own supremacy, hovered over the planet with surgical calm, assuming Earth's silence meant hesitation. It didn't. It meant calibration. They misread our stillness. They mistook it for fear. But the moment the first of their weapons carved a white-hot trench across the Earth's surface, the answer arrived, not in words, but in fire. From deep beneath oceans, from mountain silos long buried in bureaucratic neglect, Earth spoke. The missiles were old. Not elegant. Not smart. They were built in a time when war wasn't won by software but by will. And that will had not faded. It had been waiting. Their beam had barely faded from the sky when the retaliation struck. A torpedo, launched from a forgotten submarine drifting beneath Arctic waters, found the belly of the ship that fired first. The explosion was not majestic, it was ugly. Raw. Pieces of sovereign alloy rained down on the ocean as if the gods had tripped. Across the planet, fighters launched from airstrips cracked by age and wear, piloted by humans who had trained not to display, but to survive. The jets weren't cloaked or shielded. They were loud, fast, and relentless. The Sovereignty's targeting systems, built to detect predictable threats, struggled to comprehend their movements. One by one, they fell, not to superior tech, but to saturation, to disorientation, to tactics born from a species that learned long ago how to make chaos into a weapon. The aliens fired back, of course. Blinding beams. Vaporizing strikes. Their arsenal was terrifying, but limited. Designed for clean wars, not the kind Earth specialized in. Not the kind where debris becomes cover, where fire becomes signal, and where every loss becomes a reason to hit harder. Across cities, Defenses once deemed irrelevant came online. Radar systems and countermeasure grids patched together with duct tape, and code began to confuse even the most precise alien scanners. Old satellites were turned into signal repeaters. Civilian towers became jammers. The entire planet twisted itself into a defense network, not because it had been built that way, but because it could. That was the difference. Where the sovereignty saw war as a show of strength, Earth saw it as survival. And survival makes engineers out of farmers. Makes generals out of mechanics. Makes weapons out of whatever's left on hand. The invaders had the tech, but Earth had the principle. That you fight not because you're prepared, but because surrender is unacceptable. That losing doesn't mean quitting. That nothing is more dangerous than a species with its back to the wall, and a match in its hand. By the end of the day, half the invaders' fleet was falling from the sky. Not because Earth was more advanced, but because Earth refused to fight their way. Every human attack was an act of rejection. A refusal to play by alien rules. A declaration that said, you don't get to define what strength means here. And the sovereignty, for all their wisdom, had no answer for that. They believed they had time. That Earth would pause, regroup, and fall into predictable patterns of desperation. But Earth doesn't wait. Earth reacts. Not through consensus or order, but through momentum. The sovereignty had come expecting a civilization paralyzed by fear. What they found was a world in motion. Scattered, yes. Chaotic, always. But directionless? Never. While the sovereignty withdrew to repair and re-strategize, humans descended on the fallen. The ruined ships scattered across continents became more than just trophies. They became opportunity. Burned metal and shattered circuits were not alien to us. They were puzzles. And humanity is very good at solving puzzles, especially when survival is the prize. Soldiers moved into wreckage zones without hesitation. Scientists arrived without sleep. Civilians showed up with tools, notebooks, and quiet fury. They didn't ask for permission. They got to work. Inside the fractured hulls, nothing made sense, at first. The interfaces weren't meant for human hands. The language, the code, the systems, alien in every possible way. But curiosity is the fuel of Earth's genius. In labs cobbled together from shipping containers and shattered concrete, someone got the first panel to light up. Another figured out how to power a core with repurposed transformers. There was no instruction manual. No time to wait for mastery. Humanity didn't need to understand everything. It only needed enough. And Earth never needed elegance. When reinforcements came from the sovereignty, they were met not with organized armies, but with something far worse, uncertainty. Drop pods meant to land with precision were thrown off course by atmospheric interference. Satellites long considered obsolete were reactivated, used not to communicate but to mislead. The sovereignty's own data betrayed them. Their landings scattered, their formations broke, and they entered terrain they hadn't mapped, because on Earth, even the land resists invasion. Guerrilla warfare reignited across forests, cities, caves, oceans. This wasn't a global campaign. It was 1,000 independent ambushes. A network with no center. Fighters moved through war zones wearing scavenged armor, wielding human weapons modified with alien scraps. They didn't always win. But they never stopped. And the sovereignty, for all its power, couldn't understand why. There were no leaders to assassinate. No command centers to destroy. Only resistance, everywhere, all the time. The real weapon was adaptability. Earth didn't just fight. It learned. Every loss was recorded. Every mistake became a lesson. With each new strike, humanity grew faster, smarter, harder to predict. The sovereignty ships became test subjects. Their weapons, calibration tools. Their armor, challenge. A dead alien meant another piece of the puzzle unlocked. Factories were rebuilt not for comfort, but for war. Schools rewired their curriculums overnight. Children learned how to shield a signal. Grandparents remembered how to melt down old metal for frontline repairs. Humanity didn't collapse. It reformed. Like steel under pressure. Like muscle torn and healed thicker. Then came the broadcast. It was raw and distorted, patched together from stolen fragments of alien tech and bouncing through networks the sovereignty couldn't trace. It wasn't delivered by a government. It wasn't signed. It simply appeared. This is Earth. We are not your vassals. We are not primitives. And we are not done. There was no follow-up. No demand. No negotiation. Because Earth wasn't asking. It was declaring. They believed escalation would bring obedience. That if the first wave had failed, the next would crush any remaining resistance. So they sent something different. Not a fleet this time, but a symbol. The Charon Dreadnought. A fortress with engines. A planetary assault platform built not for war, but for subjugation. It didn't move fast. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was a sentence. Its weapons had reduced continents to ash before. It had ended rebellions without firing a shot. Civilizations surrendered at the mere sight of its shadow stretching across their world. But Earth did not. The dreadnought entered orbit with gravity wells pulsing and defensive shields humming like a storm. It was meant to be the final chapter, a full stop at the end of Earth's resistance. On board, its commanders issued the usual warnings, scanned the surface for hostiles, and waited for a response that never came. What they didn't realize was that Earth had already responded. Not with missiles. Not with pleas. But with calculation. While the dreadnought made its slow descent, thousands of Earth's satellites came alive, most of them broken, forgotten, or considered obsolete. But now they weren't weapons. They were mirrors. Lenses. Reflections. And decoys. Earth had studied its enemy. The dreadnought relied on targeting data, spatial mapping, thermal analysis, all fed by its onboard systems. So Earth fed it lies. Thousands of false signals flooded its sensors. Phantom heat signatures appeared across the globe. Entire cities seemed to vanish, replaced with fabricated terrain. Its weapons fired blindly at decoys. Entire barrages launched into forests where no humans waited. Every time it fired, it gave away its rhythm. And every movement it made was watched. High above, silent and cold, an old project long considered a failure drifted in low Earth orbit. Once intended as the framework for a Mars colony, it had been abandoned when funding collapsed. Now it had been reborn, Project Thunderclap. A massive coil gun had been built into its core. Crude by alien standards. Brutal by human ones. It was powered by every scrap of energy Earth could funnel into orbit, cooled with recycled fluid lines and shielded by melted-down wreckage. It could fire once. Maybe twice. That was all. When it fired, it did so without fanfare. No beam. No flash. Just a spike of kinetic force, 200 kilograms of depleted uranium accelerated to an impossible velocity. The slug didn't glow. It screamed. And that scream tore through 3 layers of shielding, hull armor, internal structure, and into the gravity core of the dreadnought. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship folded inward. Not exploded, collapsed. Its own artificial gravity turned against it, crushing the structure in a spiral of implosion. There were no escape pods. No distress beacons. Just silence again. Real silence this time. The sovereignty hadn't just lost a ship. They'd lost something sacred. The Charon Dreadnought wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of control, of certainty, of untouchable power. And it had died without ever touching the ground. That death echoed louder than any broadcast. For the first time in centuries, the sovereignty wasn't just challenged, it was humiliated. And the worst part? It hadn't been taken down by a superweapon, a galactic force, or a divine intervention. It had been taken down by a planet they called primitive, using technology they thought irrelevant, wielded by a people they never understood. Earth didn't need to match the enemy's strength. It only needed to find the fracture, and hit it hard enough to split history. They called it a dreadnought, though it had no equal. It wasn't a ship, it was a floating judgment. A vessel larger than cities, older than dynasties, descending from the edge of the solar system like a slow-moving execution. The sovereignty had grown tired of failures. Their commanders, bruised by humiliation, deployed the Charon-class war engine. Not to win a war, but to erase an example. This wasn't strategy. It was revenge. It was the act of an empire trying to crush the one thing it couldn't control, defiance. Earth saw it coming. Its silhouette darkened the stars, eating light as it came. Satellites were blinded. Signals were scrambled. Gravity shifted. And still, the planet did not panic. Instead, it waited. Quiet. Calculating. The dreadnought's weapon arrays came online, capable of vaporizing tectonic plates, draining oceans, punching through the planet's crust like it was paper. It had done this before. To other worlds. It had always worked. But not here. What the sovereignty failed to grasp, again, was that Earth had no intention of matching firepower with firepower. That would have been suicide. Instead, humanity did what it always did best. It cheated. Old satellites, long thought dead, suddenly began transmitting. They weren't weapons. They weren't shields. They were noise. Mirrors. Echo chambers. They flooded the dreadnought's sensory systems with false signals, ghost data, and misaligned targeting coordinates. Hundreds of artificial decoys blinked across its scanners, multiplying every second. The ship's AI fought to isolate real from fake, and failed. Every adjustment made it worse. What had been a surgical instrument became a blinded beast, flailing above a planet it could no longer see clearly. Then, Earth fired a shot. Not from orbit. Not from a space fleet. From something forgotten. A failed Mars colony platform, once considered a waste of funding, repurposed in secret by engineers working in silence. They had converted it into something crude and terrifying, a magnetic accelerator weapon, built with the parts of dozens of dead projects, and one unforgivable purpose. It fired a single round. A dense, depleted uranium slug accelerated past orbital speed. No warhead. No AI. Just raw mass and velocity. It didn't explode. It punched through. The dreadnought's armor, built to resist heat and radiation, had never been tested against something so simple. The slug pierced its upper hull, tore through 5 decks, and ruptured its artificial gravity core. The ship didn't explode. It collapsed. 1,000 tiny singularities formed and vanished in seconds, consuming the interior structure like termites through wood. What remained fell, not as fire, but as fragments. The Earth watched as the greatest weapon the sovereignty had ever built dissolved into its own ambition. No cheer rose from the planet. There was no celebration. Only recognition. The battle wasn't over. The war hadn't ended. But a truth had been proven. Brute force would not conquer Earth. Cleverness would defend it. And next time, they wouldn't need a lucky shot. They'd be ready.